Jin Yue was originally the most enviable legitimate daughter of the Duke of Song, with a noble status and a beautiful appearance. She had made a promise to be a better-looking son than Panin. Unfortunately, in a palace upheaval, the fiancée with a human face and animal heart colluded with her stepsister to kill her close relative, causing her tragic death. Reborn for a lifetime, she made a vow to protect her beloved for the rest of her life and never refuse to die. Make that ruthless fiancée unhappy, make the wicked stepmother, who was carefree in her previous life, restless in sleep and food, make the stepsister who ascended to the throne in her previous life infamous, and the crown prince's cousin, who should have passed away early, has been firmly seated in his legitimate position and has no worries in this lifetime. The empress's aunt, who should have died tragically, has been rich and prosperous throughout her life. The ancestral family, which should have been wiped out, is thriving and thriving. And she didn't ask for more, but what happened and the new science scout invited him in. Keywords of the novel. The rebirth of the first daughter. No pop-ups, the rebirth of the first daughter. The end of the family TXT complete collection download, the rebirth of the first daughter. The end of the family latest chapter reading. Chapter 1. End of household, seeking collection, seeking follow-up. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. End of household, seeking collection, seeking follow-up. The rain poured down outside the window, and the strong wind enveloped the withered branches and leaves floating in the rain. Lightning and thunder roared, as if the sky had collapsed. But the sky has really collapsed. Song Jin Yue was dressed in white mourning attire, with only a white flower pinned on her bun and no other attire. At this moment, she was leaning over the table, holding a candlestick. The room immediately lit up a bit, and the dim yellow candlelight reflected on her fair face, adding a touch of melancholy. I felt inexplicably uneasy in my heart, as if something bigger was about to happen. The emperor died suddenly, and all officials entered the palace to guard the spirits and assist in the funeral. Due to concerns about the empress's aunt, she entered the palace to accompany her. The knife that had just picked out the candle suddenly slipped off, without much thought, and quickly reached out to pick it up. The sharp blade fell into the palm, and the delicate palm of the hand was instantly torn open, with blood splattering out in an instant. She quickly threw the knife onto the ground, furrowed her brow, and the worry in her eyes grew even greater. But at this moment, a noisy sound sounded outside the house. Some people were crying, some were running briskly in the rain, as if fleeing for their lives, and there was the sound of swords colliding. Is it chaotic? Song Jin Yue's heart suddenly emptied, and she didn't even bother to put on a coat. She hurriedly ran to the door to check, only to see the maid Qiuyun, who had brought her into the palace, soaking wet all over her body and her face full of fear. "Miss, run away. The fifth prince has turned against him. Run away quickly. Is he Yuanjia reversed? Impossible. How could it be? She doesn't believe it. By the way, aunt. Prince's cousin. Where are they?" Song Jin Yue ran towards the empress's dormitory with her skirt in hand, unaware that the girl behind her had fallen into the rain, and a sharp sword pierced through her chest. Along the way, I saw corpses lying on the palace path, and the rain and blood stained the entire palace path red. "Auntie." Looking at the tightly closed palace door in front of her, Song Jin Yue's voice trembled. She reached out and pushed the door, only halfway through. She saw that the person lying at the door was actually her aunt. Song Jin Yue wiped away her tears, got up, and ran inside. She saw that the once bustling palace was now littered with corpses. And at this moment, the queen's aunt is lying on the cold ground, with an old woman in a protective position lying on her body, that is her grandmother. Beside my aunt lies the crown prince's cousin, as well as my uncle's second and third cousins. These are all her close relatives, but now they have lost their breath. Sister is really easy to find. So it's here. That voice, she was incredibly familiar, it was the stepsister Song Jinsi born to her stepmother. Song Jinsi was adorned with a luxurious red hairpin, and the man standing beside her was none other than the culprit, He Yuanjia. That's her fiancé, eh? He Yuanjia, my aunt treats you well, why did you take such a cruel hand? He Yuanjia was only a full moon old when his mother passed away. His aunt remembered him as lonely and helpless, so she hugged him and raised him, making him the legitimate son. The crown prince's cousin has always loved him. But what about him? Everything she saw and heard as she passed by was an interpretation of what He Yuanjia had done. To blame, one can only blame them for not being born into the royal family. The heavenly family has never been said to have familial affection. Where is this still the He Yuanjia she knows? What about the gentle and kind Yuan frame brother from the past? Such a ruthless and ungrateful person is not the Yuan frame brother she knows. A sharp blade, however, pierced straight into her chest at this moment. Song Jin Yue's embroidered eyebrows furrowed tightly, and a cold sweat immediately fell down her pale forehead. She felt a whirl and her body was limp and powerless, falling to the ground. The bright red blood bloomed one dazzling flower after another on the white clothes. Pain. A bone-piercing pain. Song Jin Yue finally looked at her close relatives in that area. Anger, unwilling, was finally drowned by the rainstorm outside. Small Theater, the first book was eventually converted to free reading. Please rest assured that this book will not be available for sale. Seeking collection, seeking follow-up reading. The collection and follow-up of every treasure is very important to me. Thank you very much, my dear children. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Rebirth. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2 Rebirth. Just as we entered Mengdong, the Yunquan villa in the suburbs of Beijing, with its blue bricks and white tiles, was surrounded by red maple trees everywhere. Immersed in it, it feels like a sea of flowers without distinction. Miss, Grandma Zhao next to Madam has arrived. Qiuyun pushed open the door and saw her young lady sitting in front of the carved bronze mirror again. She sighed and bent down to pick up a peachwood comb carved with clusters of flowers from the carved dowry. The girl in the carved bronze mirror has a beautiful and picturesque appearance, but her tightly furrowed eyebrows add a touch of sadness to her beauty. These days, the young lady always sits in front of the dowry in a daze. Qiuyun combed her jet black hair, feeling a bit distressed, but still advised, Master Guigua still cares about Mississippi. Now that someone has been sent to invite you 3 or 4 times, Miss, please don't be angry with Master Guigua anymore. Now that you are old, it's not appropriate to stay here. It's better to go back to the mansion first. 5 years ago, the late lady passed away, and the young lady fell ill intermittently for 3 months. She had been treated by countless famous doctors in the capital, but there was no way. Later, the Duke of the Kingdom invited a Taoist from somewhere unknown. The Taoist bluntly stated that the young lady should leave the capital to observe filial piety for her mother for 5 years before returning to the mansion, otherwise there may be a risk of her life. Later, she accompanied the young lady to Yunquan Mountain Villa, and the young lady's health improved day by day. But over the years, the Duke has never come to see the young lady once. I'm afraid the young lady harbors resentment towards the Duke of the country. Now that the 5-year term has expired, the Duke of the country has also sent someone to pick it up, but the young lady is stubborn and refuses to go back. Zhao Mama, who came today, is the housekeeper next to the stepmother married by the Duke of China. Song Jin Yue looked at the familiar face in the carved bronze mirror with a hint of melancholy. She was unexpectedly reborn before all close relatives have had an accident. Inform Grandma Zhao and set off tomorrow to return to the mansion. Autumn Yun's expression hesitated for a moment. Miss, is she willing to go back? But how could the changes before and after be so significant? A few times ago, the steward of the government came to invite me, but I was scolded by the young lady and now I have agreed. Without much thought, Qiuyun smiled happily and quickly replied, I'll go and inform Grandma Zhao. As he finished speaking, he placed the peach-wood comb carved with clusters of flowers on the carved dowry and walked briskly out of the room. Song Jin Yue slowly stood up and walked to the carved window. With her bare hands, she gently pushed open the window. The fresh breeze hit her face, and a strand of hair at her temples was blown to her shoulders, revealing a snow-white and tender fragrant neck. A pair of apricot eyes shimmered like a deep mountain spring. Looking at the bright red maple leaves on the back mountain, the gentle breeze blows late at night. The white jade hand reached out of the carving window and took a maple leaf that slid off the blue stone carving beam, resembling cicada wings. The maple leaf landed steadily in her delicate palm. Song Jin Yue looked at the maple leaf and murmured in her heart. In this life, she must protect her close relatives. With this in mind, she clenched her palm, and the maple leaves in her palm immediately fell into pieces. Spreading it out again, my palm was filled with tiny maple leaves. My eyes were filled with disgust. With a casual flick, the tiny maple leaves turned into flying catkins, drifting down in the gentle evening breeze. Just as I closed the carved window, a burst of laughter came to mind outside the door. Miss Eyre can be considered willing to return to the mansion, as the Duke and his wife of the province are restless in the capital all day long. What caught the eye was a woman wearing a dark purple double-breasted Confucian jacket paired with a deep purple skirt embroidered with large clusters of flowers. Looking up, I saw a smile on the wrinkled face, but there was a hint of disdain hidden in his eyes. If it weren't for the words of the Duke, how could she use this old bone that is about to fall apart to suffer in this place? It wasn't because she was protecting her wife's reputation that she was able to embarrass herself in this situation. Otherwise, who would be willing to come to this remote mountain villa? What about the beautiful scenery? Where can we compare to the bustling city of Beijing? After speaking, Zhao Mama sat down on the soft red-painted yellow pear-wood bed in the main hall, her eyes filled with disgust. She threw the handkerchief embroidered on the bed, which was mostly troublesome, towards one corner. Song Jin Yue's cold face furrowed slightly with embroidered eyebrows. In her past life, she had been harassed by this woman both openly and secretly. Zhao Mama, do you know that the handkerchief you just threw away is the welcome gift I embroidered for my mother? Song Jin Yue gently moved to the handkerchief that Zhao Mama had thrown into the corner, picked it up, and then put it back into the embroidered basket on the black painted low table on the soft couch. The smile on her face was gentle and shallow, but it made Zhao Mama's heart tremble. Is this handkerchief actually a gift for Madame's meeting? If Madame finds out about this, what should she do? But what if this is just an excuse from Miss Eyre? Zhao Mama immediately pulled down her face, snorted coldly, and said disdainfully, Miss Eyre, don't bother with me, this old lady. Even if it's just a gift for my wife, I didn't do anything about it. Is it possible that Miss Eyre wants to slander the old slave? What a cunning slave! What a clever mouth, red and white teeth, just open your mouth and come. Over the years, I haven't been in the mansion, yet I don't know that now the Duke's mansion has no rules like this. The smile on Song Jin Yue's face gradually faded, and a cold light immediately swept over Zhao Mama. Zhao Mama's heart was empty and she felt a slight chill, muttering to herself, what was going on? When I came, I also heard the lady mention it. Miss Eyre is the most kind and easy to handle. Why is what you said to Madame different now? After all, she had witnessed the wind and rain with Shenshi. Even though Zhao Mama felt a little flustered in her heart, she didn't show any signs on her face. She stroked the pleats on her sleeves and calmly replied, Miss Eyre, I am also ordered to handle things today. If I offend Miss Eyre, please ask Miss Eyre to go back and talk to the Duke of the country. Relying on being the steward in front of her wife, Zhao Mama was humiliated by Song Jin Yue. At the moment, she only wanted to return to the mansion quickly, and really didn't want to stay any longer. But where did she expect Song Jin Yue's temper? Pop! Song Jin Yue raised her hand and slapped Zhao Mama face to face, mocking, even a woman would dare to be cruel in front of me. This is a lesson for you. You. Zhao Mama covered her face, her eyes shocked and angry. She glared angrily at Miss Eyre, gritted her teeth, shook her sleeves, and turned around to leave the room. When he arrived, he gave a "bah" at the door. Qiuyun was shocked by what had happened before her and didn't know what to do. Seeing the woman's actions at the door, she was also angry and stomped her foot before running to the young lady. "Miss, your hands still hurt," she said, feeling both heartbroken and aggrieved. "No pain, pack your luggage quickly. We'll go back to the mansion tomorrow." The displeasure brought by Grandma Zhao was immediately dispersed. But on the second day, I didn't see Zhao Mama. The steward of Yunquan Villa replied, saying that Zhao Mama went down the mountain and back to Beijing in the dark last night. The steward thought that the person was kicked away by Miss Eyre. After all, Miss Eyre has already expelled several officials from the government, so she has not reported this matter to Miss Eyre. Song Jin smiled coldly under her sweet heart. Shen's stepmother's mother.in.law really can't hold her breath. She just got angry yesterday and ran away. Didn't you come to pick her up? It's just that, so she ordered the steward to send someone to set up a carriage, and she returned to the mansion on her own. The steward immediately brought someone to personally escort her back to Beijing. The carriage runs on the official road, but it is close to the foot of the overlapping mountains, and there are often gravel on the road. The bumpiness of the carriage, coupled with Zhao Mama's sudden departure, made Qiuyun particularly angry. She pouted and said, "Miss, do you think Zhao Mama would report the wrongdoer first when she returns to the mansion? After all, she and the young lady have been away from the government office for 5 years." Song Jin Yue raised his eyebrows and thought for a moment, then slowly replied. "Troops for the enemy, earth for floods." End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Return to Beijing. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. Return to Beijing. The carriage arrived in the capital at the beginning of Su hour, but the streets were still bustling with people. The green cloud veil on the car window is slowly blown by the evening breeze, and the scenery outside is truly rich and charming. It has not been back for 5 years, and the capital is even more prosperous than before. "Miss, it's time to send someone to pick you up from tomorrow's palace." Autumn Yun lay by the window, looking out at the scenery and murmuring with her cheeks bulging. The Empress and the late lady are the sisters of the legitimate relatives. The young lady often stays in the palace from a young age, and the Empress also dotes on this niece. Remembering the tragic death of her aunt in the previous life, Song Jin Yue lowered her eyes, and there was no more light in her eyes. Qiuyun thought that the young lady remembered the late lady, so she quickly withdrew her hand and sat on the side. The atmosphere inside the carriage was particularly low. As they walked all the way to the gate of the Duke's mansion, Song Jin Yue remained silent. After the carriage stopped, Qiuyun helped the young lady out of the carriage. Song Jin Yue looked up at the familiar Guogong mansion in front of her, feeling inexplicably melancholic. In her past life, she had followed Zhao Mama back to the mansion. For this matter, my father gave Zhao Mama a particularly generous reward. At that time, the mansion was decorated with lanterns and colorful decorations, presenting a joyful and peaceful atmosphere. But now, the people in the mansion may not know that they will come back. Looking down at the tightly closed black door carved with auspicious clouds, she couldn't help but recall the scene 5 years ago when she left the Guogong mansion, and her father also saw her off the carriage from there. Her eyes were full of reluctance, reminding her to take good care of herself. At that time, she only felt unfilial. Her mother had just passed away, and she was about to leave the mansion, leaving her father alone to guard this vast mansion. But who knew, half a year after she left, Shen became her stepmother. She learned about this at Yunquan Villa and didn't know how many porcelain pieces had been smashed. If it weren't for Qiuyun's persuasion, she might have rushed back to Kyoto to ask her father for clarification. Later, day after day, she also became tired. Her good sister, Song Jinsi, sent people day after day to Yunquan Villa to deliver letters to her. The letter expressed her affection for her younger sister and also wept about the various mockery and ridicule she had received while raising her outside the mansion over the years. She said that her sisters were the only close relatives in the world who had blood ties. Later on, she gradually became sisters with Song Jinsi, who talked about everything. But what will happen in the end? She snatched Yuanjian and together with him, killed her close relatives. At this moment, she will no longer believe every word of Song Jinsi. Chuyan knocked on the black-painted Nanmu gate twice and shouted to the servant guarding the gate inside, "Miss Eyre is back. Open the door quickly." The servant, dressed in a grey cloth jacket, was momentarily stunned upon hearing this. He regained his senses and quickly pushed the small door of his ear room half open. He poked his head out and saw that it was indeed Miss Eyre who had returned. He hurriedly headed towards the main door. Kicking his half-asleep companion at the main entrance, he said, "Go and report to Lord Gua, Miss Eyre is back." For a moment, the quiet Guogong mansion became noisy. The mother-in-law, maidservant, and servant each stretched their necks and leaned towards the outside of the main hall courtyard. The Duke of Song and the Shen family had already shed their coats and wanted to rest. Upon hearing this, they hastily changed into new clothes and went to the main hall. Song Jinsi was practicing calligraphy in the room. After hearing the girl's reply, she put down her pen and hurried over. "Father, mother, big sister." Today, Song Jin Yue especially wore a simple and clean shirt, a bamboo blue double-breasted Confucian jacket paired with a moon-white Confucian skirt. She lowered her eyes and greeted the ceremony with a straight expression. The Duke of Song now changed into a dark blue uniform and sat upright on the main throne made of yellow pear wood. The smile on his face reached deep into his heart, but it was because his daughter, who was already very old this year, couldn't be called to him again. Perhaps it was because he hadn't seen her for many years, and his expression was somewhat awkward. Shen was dressed in a sandalwood-colored double-breasted Confucian jacket embroidered with clusters of flowers, paired with a silver-edged purple skirt with pleats, giving her a dignified and gentle appearance. Shen's phoenix eyes curved as she took a few steps forward, grabbed Song Jin Yue's hand, sighed, and said, "I've really brought you back." Shen casually twisted her hair into a bun, with only a golden hairpin carved with golden phoenix playing pearls on top. The blood-red pearls looked like top-dot quality agate offered by foreign countries last year. On the Shanyuan festival 2 years ago, the Empress rewarded a group of aristocratic ladies with this batch of agate offerings. The Queen sent someone else to give a separate gift to Song Jin Yue at Yunquan Villa. Your yard is carefully cleaned by your mother every day. It's convenient to stay in the mansion now. When you wake up early tomorrow morning, take a closer look. Tell your mother what needs to be added or replaced. Shen smiled kindly and patted the back of her hand. Song Jin Yue only and then withdrew her hand from Shen's palm. Shen was slightly stunned and regained consciousness, with a smile on her face. She turned around and walked towards the position next to the Duke of Gua. The Duke of Song was very satisfied with the Shen family and said, "Let the small kitchen bring some food to Yuer's yard." "Yes. Let's go down and rest first." Duke Song waved his hand, feeling sorry for his daughter's fatigue all the way. Song Jin Yue bowed again before leaving the main hall. The women and maids outside the courtyard gathered in a crowd, and when they saw her coming out, they respectfully bowed and called out, "Miss Eyre." Song Jin Yue looked up. The women and girls in the yard were all replaced by Shinshi's descendants. In her past life, after she left the government office, Shen changed her mind and replaced the elderly people who used to serve her mother. For 5 years, the government had lost sight of a familiar face. "Miss Eyre, wait a moment." A woman wearing a dark purple jacket caught up behind her. That was Grandma Zhao who went to pick her up yesterday. Madam specially ordered the old servant to lead the way for Mississippi. Zhao Mama smiled apologetically, as she couldn't see a hint of arrogance in Yunquan Villa. Seeing that she didn't answer, Zhao Mama took a few steps closer to her and reached out to take out a high-quality golden hairpin from the spacious dark purple sleeve. She said, "Last night, I remembered that the gift that Miss De specifically ordered me to bring to Miss Eyre had been left in the mansion, so I hurriedly came back to pick it up. I had originally planned to pick Miss Eyre up tomorrow, but to my surprise, Miss Eyre came back alone. One is to tell Miss Eyre why she left without saying goodbye yesterday, and the other is to tell her how Miss De cares about her younger sister. In fact, the hairpin did not fall in the mansion. Yesterday, when she returned to the mansion, she originally wanted to arrange a meeting with the second young lady in front of the Duke and his wife, but his wife asked her to stay calm. Firstly, it is a definite matter for Miss Eyre to return to the mansion at the moment. Secondly, if there is a dispute between Zhao Mama and Song Jin Yue, it will make others feel that her stepmother treats her stepdaughter unfairly and is easy to fall into trouble. Zhao Mama did indeed plan to pick her up tomorrow, but to her surprise, Miss Eyre returned on her own. Just now in the main hall, Grandma Zhao was afraid that Miss Eyre would bring up the matter of Yunquan Mountain Villa in front of the Duke. Fortunately, she didn't mention it, so she finally came and wanted to leave a good impression in front of Miss Eyre, letting her know that she didn't mean to leave without saying goodbye yesterday. Song Jin Yue's slender eyelashes trembled slightly, and she tugged at the corner of her lips with a faint She didn't believe this. In her previous life, Zhao Mama presented the hairpin to her like an invitation for credit. The old lady in the yard looked at Zhao Mama like she was watching a play. Zhao Mama's face was blue and purple, but it was not easy to get angry, so she had to chase after her with a smile. Until they arrived at the entrance of Ming's Huxuan, Song Jin Yue asked Chuyan to send Zhao Mama away. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Servants. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. Servants. The strong wind wrinkled, and the bare branches of the peach trees in Ming's Huxuan's courtyard crackled. It looks quite depressed. There are two maidservants dressed in pink clothes gathered together in the long corridor. The two of them heard the sound of pushing the door and looked up at the door together. These two maidservants were both sent by Shen a month ago. Song Jin Yue has not been in the Duke's mansion for the past few years, and apart from the daily cleaning of the old lady, there is no one living in Ming's Huxuan. Although the maid had never seen Miss Eyre, she could naturally recognize her from her attire. The two hurriedly supported each other and walked quickly to the door to greet her. Maid Yinxing has seen Miss Eyre. Maid Chunchan has seen Miss Eyre. The rules were upright and clever. In her past life, she was also one of these two girls. She was grateful for Shen's thoughtful consideration and gave her a thoughtful gift, but she overlooked one thing. These two girls were more beautiful than the other. In the past, the clothes of the maids in the mansion were loose, but they always made their clothes tighter and outlined their figures delicately. Once they took them out of the mansion, and others laughed at her behind her back. There was a legitimate young lady from the mansion. How could the maids around them become more and more frivolous? Later, these words reached her ears, and she was so embarrassed that she didn't leave the mansion for a month. When her aunt learned about this, she specially sent two maids from the palace to serve her. However, after Yun Xing and Chun Chan were taken away by the Shen family, they never saw each other again. Not bad, autumn charm, appreciate. How could she fall into the same pit again in this life? That's naturally not possible. Autumn Yun quickly took out the copper coins prepared as instructed by the young lady in advance, and the two maids each rewarded them with 100 won. Taking the copper coin, the two of them thanked each other once again. Song Jin Yue's cold and aloof face suddenly burst into a smile, and her delicate jade hand casually pointed to the two bare peach trees in the courtyard, instructing, "Those two peach trees look very unsightly. Each of you has one. Tomorrow morning, if the peach tree you are in charge of is still in this courtyard, then I will personally send you to my mother to post." The two maidservants were shocked and looked at Miss Eyre in disbelief. Miss Eyre, maidservants. Song Jin Yue waved her hands in front of the two of them with a smile and shook her head, saying, "Is it difficult?" Isn't this a small matter to handle? I think my mother might have taken a wrong look and chose the two of you. The two maids quickly denied, I'll go now. Song Jin Yue nodded in satisfaction before returning to the main house with autumn charm. That peach tree was still planted by her when she was young, and now pushing open the door of the yellow pear wood with black carved clusters of peonies, one can see a multi-treasure grid yellow pear wood frame filled with porcelain treasures. Crossing the multi-treasure grid and following the moon-white smoke veil, one arrives at the main hall outside. The black lacquer and yellow pear furniture, tables and chairs inside are all in their original appearance. Behind the lotus screen embroidered with buds waiting to bloom on the right side is her dormitory. On the bed carved from black lacquer nanmu with 100 flowers facing the phoenix, there hangs her beloved moonlight silk and brocade tent. Everything is as it was before, and it seems like everything is completely different as before. Song Jin felt inexplicably lost in her heart. Miss, please rest earlier, said Chiyun in the preface. I'm afraid someone from the palace will be sent to pick me up tomorrow. Song Jin Yue's worried eyebrows slowly relaxed and nodded in response. After serving the young lady to wash up, Chiyun set up a bunk at the entrance of the outer room to guard her. Yun Xing and Chun Chan were hula felling peach trees in the courtyard. Song Jin Yue fell asleep with the noisy sound, staying up all night until dawn. When I woke up early, I didn't see the maidservants Yun Xing and Chun Chan. I only saw scattered dead branches in the courtyard, and now there was only a bare and half-person tall peach tree pole standing in the courtyard. The mess in the yard seemed to have been caused by some great calamity. Where are Yunxing and Chun Chan? Chiyun also doesn't know. She didn't see anyone when she woke up early, and she slept soundly last night, so she doesn't know when the two girls disappeared. Alright, let's go pay respects to Shen first. Today, Song Jin Yue changed into a lake water blue Confucian jacket and a pleated lake water green skirt, embroidered with dense pear blossom petals. Walking under the sun, it felt like a clear spring in the clear summer. The women and sons of the Guogong mansion all gathered in front of the main courtyard, hoping to see the true face of Miss Eyre. These women were all new to the mansion after Miss Eyre left. They only heard that Miss Eyre from the Duke's mansion had a beautiful appearance. Last night, she was in the main hall, and because it was dark and the lights were dim, she couldn't see clearly from afar. According to the rules, Shen is the stepmother, and Miss Eyre comes to the main courtyard every morning at 10 o'clock to pay her respects. I just managed to come over. Seeing the green clothes of the lake, Lian Wu lightly moved towards the main courtyard. Everyone stopped their work and waited. Song Jin Yue naturally noticed this strange gaze, but if there was nothing beside her, she walked straight towards the main courtyard. Shen specially wore a dark red Confucian dress embroidered with wealthy peonies today, and wore a pearl-studded golden phoenix on her bun. Her makeup was also exceptionally exquisite. Since she became the head of the government, this is the first time she has officially met Song Jin Yue. So he tidied up a bit out of place. As soon as Song Jin Yue arrived at the entrance of the main courtyard, Zhao Mama smiled and personally lifted the bamboo curtain to serve outside the door. Miss Eyre has arrived, Madam is waiting inside. Zhao Mama had sharp eyes and saw the golden hairpin on Miss Eyre's bun, which was sent by the eldest lady. She smiled knowingly. Miss Eyre brought this hairpin today, and it was inevitable that Madam would reward her later. Song Jin Yue glanced at Zhao Mama, nodded, and walked in. In Shen's room, there were many precious black lacquer nanmo plaques, adorned with top-notch jade ornaments. Even the moonlight veil was embroidered with gold threads, adorned with phoenix wings soaring. The porcelain on the black painted nanmo table is all of the finest Ru kiln porcelain. These porcelain cups are sold in sets of 5 and 1 pot, each worth 1,000 taels. Glancing at the ornaments in Shen's room, Song Jin Yue finally bowed and said, "Mother, big sister. Hurry up and sit next to your older sister. She has been waiting for you for almost half an hour." Shen Shi smiled and pointed to the empty seat next to Song Jinsi. Song Jin Yue just walked over. "Second sister, I didn't even say a word to you last night. Today can be considered a good conversation. Song Jinsi specially wore a light purple skirt today, embroidered with auspicious clouds and clusters on top with silver thread. This dress is still newly made, and she specially wore it today. Sorry to keep you waiting. Song Jin Yue had a slight hint of apology on her face, but a chill had already risen in her heart. In this life, she will never let her go. The sharp blade that pierced her chest in her past life was the hand of her good sister, Song Jinsi. Yue, there's something my mother wants to discuss with you. As soon as she sat down, Shen Shi began to speak. A corner of her eye cast a glance at Zhao Mama, who understood and turned around to go outside. Yinxing and Chun Chan, two maids, were originally bought from outside, but they did not sign a sales contract and only paid monthly fees. Now these two maids are about to resign. After Shen finished speaking, Zhao Mama brought in two maids, Yunxing and Chun Chan. The pink dress she wore last night was still the same, but it was covered in mud and looked particularly disheveled. Upon closer inspection, the two maids had red eyes and their small faces were covered in red marks cut by peach tree branches. These two maids actually signed a contract to sell themselves. In her previous life, she only returned to the mansion. Shen ordered someone to send the contracts to these two maids, saying that in the future, the life and death of the two maids will be in her hands. Now there has been a change in tone. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Entering the Palace. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. Entering the Palace. Mother, but did you resign because your daughter instructed them to chop peach trees? Song Jin Yue pressed her temples with her fingers, which were as smooth as sheep fat and white jade, feeling very distressed. I think my daughter, a legitimate young lady from a state mansion, cannot command the maidservants in her own courtyard to do things. A pair of apricot eyes were filled with desolation. Shen originally intended to use the matter of the two maids to knock on her, but to her surprise, she choked and didn't know how to answer. Isn't this statement, whether it's explicit or implicit, directly referring to the difficulties faced by her stepmother, who became the legitimate daughter of her original wife, after her stepmother took over the family? Shen didn't answer and took a plain handkerchief to wipe the rouge on her lips. She slowly said, "It's because my mother didn't think carefully and invited someone to come over tomorrow. Yue, please personally pick some maidservants to serve." Seeing that Shen had already spoken, Yunxing and Chun Chan dared not say any more, so they were led out by Zhao Mama. The two maids eventually returned to Ming Zhuxian to serve, and Song Jin Yue did not object to this. After all, keeping the two of them would still be useful. Without them, how would the subsequent play be sung? Shen originally intended to keep Song Jin Yue for lunch in the main courtyard, but after sitting for a while, someone from the palace was sent to invite him. Song Jin Yue was about to follow the palace attendants into the palace, but Song Jinsi stopped her and said, "Second sister, wait a moment." She pretended not to know Song Jinsi's careful thoughts. If you don't enter the palace, how can you see He Yuanjia and relieve the pain of their longing? Big sister, what's up? Today, Song Jinsi specially wore a light purple jacket skirt, with auspicious clouds embroidered with silver thread at the top, and a white jade tassel hairpin tied to the bun she pulled up. The top-dot quality bean-shaped pearls were strung together on the jade wrist, which was faintly visible in the light purple sleeves. It looked dignified and appropriate. Perhaps Song Jinsi had already known early on that someone in the palace would summon her into the palace today. Song Jinsi lowered her eyes and hesitated to speak. "Big sister, do you want to come with me into the palace?" Seeing her throw an olive branch, Song Jinsi suppressed her inner joy of success and twisted a light purple handkerchief embroidered with orchids in both hands, wondering, "But my aunt didn't call me into the palace." "Auntie." Song Jin smiled coldly under her heart's pleasure, but Song Jinsi was accustomed to climbing smoothly by borrowing a pole. Since she wants to attend a private meeting with He Yuanjian in the palace, she will do it for her, but she just needs to pay a little price. Song Jin Yue took her hand and smiled, saying, "It's okay, then let's go to the palace with me, big sister." Song Jinsi stepped forward and took her arm. In the eyes of others, she could only see the deep affection between the two sisters in the Duke's mansion. The chariots in the palace are parked in front of the gate of the Duke's mansion, and the bright yellow tent is embroidered with flowers, birds, and beasts with gold thread. There is also a pearl-made chariot curtain hanging on top, which is truly magnificent. Song Jinsi's eyes lit up, and it was the first time she had seen such an imposing carriage. But the maid behind her stabbed her own young lady, and Song Jinsi finally regained consciousness. She quickly took a step back, lifted it lightly with her bare hands, and was about to help Song Jin Yue get on the carriage first. There was a crowd of people gathered at the entrance of the Duke's mansion. If she were really asked to step onto the carriage first, it would be rumored that everyone would only know that the second young lady of the Duke's mansion was arrogant and had to be attended to by her eldest sister when going out. "Big sister, you go up first." Song Jin Yue grabbed Song Jinsi's hand and helped her onto the carriage. Song Jinsi was about to decline, indicating that she was determined to do so, so she finally gave up. Qiuyun only then helped her young lady onto the carriage, feeling indignant in her heart. The Empress was the aunt of her young lady's legitimate relatives, and the young lady was really shameless. She had never seen someone climb up the pole like this to climb up relatives. The chairs inside the carriage were also wrapped in bright yellow brocade, and a pink glass lamp was hung on the roof. The wick holder inside was still made of red agate. Even the incense burners on the table are forged of red gold, with lifelike phoenixes carved on top. The spices burned in the incense burners are also unheard of, like fruit mixed with sandalwood. It is believed that these are the spices offered by the legendary foreign countries in the capital. Over the years, Song Jinsi has already broadened her horizons. What precious treasures in the capital have she not seen? But ultimately, he was still intimidated by the grandeur of the palace. Only by standing at the highest place can one enjoy treasures that even the nobles and nobles cannot enjoy. The restless thoughts made Song Jinsi even more resentful of Song Jin Yue. Why is she so lucky? Being taller than others from birth. She is a legitimate young lady from the grand mansion, while she can only be an illegitimate daughter raised in the outer courtyard and cannot be seen. Why does she have a prestigious maternal ancestor like the Zhang family? And an aunt who becomes the queen. Even the crown prince is her cousin. Song Jinsi felt jealous and went crazy. She lowered her eyes and took a deep breath, gradually calming down the restlessness in her heart, and all of this was witnessed by Song Jin Yue. I was so foolish in my past life. How can't you tell that Song Jinsi's jealousy wants to burn her to death? Fortunately, she has been reborn and everything is still in time. The carriage stopped at the entrance of the palace, and the queen sent a sedan chair to pick her up. Along with her came the palace steward, Xiang Xiu. After seeing the ceremony, Xiang Xiu was worried and didn't know that the young lady from the government would also come. Therefore, the Empress only ordered someone to prepare a soft sedan chair. What should we do now? Song Jin Yue naturally understood why Xiang embroidery was difficult, and said, Sister Xiang embroidery, the first time Sister Xiang entered the palace, you should take us on a walk to Aunt's dormitory. Excuse me, Sister Xiang Xiu. Song Jinsi was also busy agreeing on the side. Xiang Xiu nodded and led the two towards the Zhaohua Hall where the Empress resided. The Empress has been thinking about Miss Air for many years. Yesterday, she heard that Miss Air had returned and didn't sleep well all night. She sent someone to pick you up early this morning. Xiang Xiu murmured, but when she mentioned that Empress had not slept all night, a worried expression welled up in her eyes. Is Aunt's body okay? Song Jin Yue keenly sensed something unusual. In her past life, at this time, her aunt seemed to be sick. The medicine prescribed by the imperial physician had been taken intermittently for about 10 days, but her mental state was deteriorating day by day. Later, for some unknown reason, the imperial physician who treated my aunt died at home, and my aunt was also much more haggard. She went to the palace and stayed with her aunt for half a month, but her aunt never mentioned why she was sick. Just whenever I mention illness, my eyes always turn red. It's quite strange to think about my aunt's illness. I have doubts in my heart. A group of people arrived at the entrance of the Zhaohua Hall and ran towards a palace maid wearing purple palace attire with a panicked expression. The palace maid saw that it was Sister Xiang Xiu who had returned. She was so anxious that she almost burst into tears and said, "Sister Xiang Xiu, you've come back, Empress." The palace maid actually burst into tears as she spoke. Xiang Xiu's expression tightened, and she didn't care about the two sisters behind her, Song Jin Yue. She only instructed them to go and invite Dr. Su, and hurriedly ran to the main hall. This scene had never happened in a previous life, and Song Jin Yue didn't care much about it. She quickly followed suit. The palace maids in the Zhaohua Palace were in a hurry, each as anxious as ants on a hot pot. Song Jin Yue casually pulled a palace maid and asked what had happened in the Zhaohua Hall. Only then did I realize that my aunt had just coughed up blood. The palace maids who served in the palace were all in a panic for a moment. In the past month, the Empress has not been feeling well, and even the Crown Prince came to invite ensure, the Empress did not have much thought. I just feel dizzy and unable to sleep soundly all night. Yesterday I heard that my niece had returned, which gave me a slight boost of energy. However, due to not sleeping well all night, I have coughed up blood now. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Mysteries. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6 Mysteries. Song Jin Yue didn't even bother to glance at Song Jinsi behind her. She let go of the palace maid's hand and hurriedly ran towards the main hall of the Zhaohua Hall, lifting her skirt. The palace maids in and out of my aunt's dormitory were not chaotic, and their faces became increasingly anxious. The Emperor and the Empress are young couples, and their affection cannot be compared to that of a favored concubine in the palace. If the Empress really has any good or bad intentions, then none of the servants serving in the Zhaohua Palace will be without criticism, and in severe cases, their lives will be at risk. Xiang embroidery has helped the Empress to rest on the couch. The bright yellow embroidered blue gauze with auspicious dragons and phoenixes seems to separate two worlds, one noisy and the other dead silent. After settling down the Empress, Xiang Xiu turned around and saw Miss Song Air following in. However, the Empress was now exhausted and afraid she couldn't speak. He walked toward Song Jin Yue with some apologies. "Miss Song Air, Empress." Song Jin Yue's embroidered eyebrows furrowed slightly and she shook her head gently. "Sister Xiang Xiu, I'll just stay here and guard my aunt. You go ahead and get busy." I originally wanted to persuade Miss Song Air to go back first, but now, seeing her so firm, I knew I might not be able to persuade her. So I said, "Miss Song Air, why don't you go to the side hall and sit down first? Later, the imperial physician will come over to see the Empress." Song Jin Yue nodded slightly and saw Xiang Xiu enter again. She then turned around and wanted to head towards the side hall, but she didn't see Song Jinsi's figure. Since I didn't follow her into the Zhaohua Hall, if I wasn't in the courtyard, I think I might have gone somewhere else. At this time, when the Zhaohua Hall was in chaos, Song Jin Yue took her autumn charm with her and went outside the hall. However, at first glance, she did not see Song Jinsi's figure, only Yun Xiang, who was quite at a loss outside the hall. That is the maid brought into the palace by the eldest sister. Autumn charm brings the fragrance of clouds to the side hall. Autumn Yun also knew that it was not the time to elaborate at this moment, so she bowed and bowed before calling Yun Xiang over. Song Jinsi had been standing here all along and went to the side hall to wait. Xiang Xiu didn't trust Miss Song Air, so she ordered a palace maid to serve her. Song Jin Yue then sent the palace maid to see if the imperial physician had arrived, because she still had something to ask Yun Xiang. Behind the screen of the blue veil curtains is the side hall of the Zhaohua Hall. When Autumn Yun led Yun Xiang to follow Song Jin Yue, Yun Xiang's expression was flustered. Yun Xiang, where's big sister? Song Jin Yue glanced at Yun Xiang with a faint tone, but there was a hint of anger between her eyebrows. Miss Huier, Miss De has just gone to the Imperial Hospital to invite the Imperial physician for Empress Dowager. Yun Xiang tightly clenched her palms hidden between her sleeves, sweating profusely from her palms, and her heart pounded violently. She lowered her eyes and dared not meet the gaze of Miss Eyre. I know now. You should go outside the Zhaohua Palace and wait for the eldest sister. If she comes back, bring the eldest sister here. Song Jin Yue naturally saw a hint and sent Yun Xiang out without any sound or expression. Seeing Yun Xiang lift the Qingyun veil and walk out, she waved her hand and called Qiyun to her, whispering, You quietly go out and inquire about where big sister has gone. Qiyun nodded before retreating. Coincidentally, the palace maid of the Xiang embroidery school completed the task she had entrusted and walked over. Miss Song Eyre, the imperial physician has arrived and is currently treating the empress. This palace maid usually follows Xiang Xiu to learn the rules, and her name is Cui Xiang. She is clever. Knowing the position of Miss Song in front of the empress, she dared not neglect her and replied truthfully. Which imperial physician is here? Miss Song Eyre, here comes Dr. Su. The one who came was still the imperial physician who treated his aunt in a previous life, but suddenly died at home a month later. Thinking of all the things in her past life, Song Jin Yue felt inexplicably uneasy. What was going on among them? What's wrong with my aunt's illness? Song Jin Yue couldn't help but raise her hand and pinch the yin tang acupoint, her embroidered eyebrows furrowing slightly. When did my aunt get sick? What are the symptoms? Cui Xiang's hands were hanging on her side, her forehead slightly lowered, and after thinking for a moment, she looked up and said, The empress has been sick since the beginning of the month. Previously, she had a loss of appetite, but later she was unconscious and lethargic all day, and her spirit has become much more tired than before. Aunt's body has always been taken care of by Dr. Su. Yes. Dr. Su, what's the reason for Aunt's illness? At first, Dr. Su said that Empress Dowager had suffered from wind cold, but this wind cold lasted for more than a month. Dr. Su then said that Empress Dowager's body had been hollowed out due to the wind cold. Cui Xiang didn't say anything more, looking at Miss Song Eyre, her eyes misted up. Dr. Su once said that if the cold wind of Empress Dowager cannot be completely cured, she may not live long. The Empress is also aware of this matter and has issued a decree. If anyone in the Zhaohua Palace dares to reveal any information, they will be shot to death. Due to the mother's pleading in front of Dr. Su agreed to keep this matter hidden for her. It's just that the Empress was exposed to the cold wind, that's why. Song Jin Yue did not embarrass Cui Xiang. Her delicate jade hands were only lowered from her yin tang acupoint, but her furrowed eyebrows showed no signs of stretching. She waved her hand and asked Cui Xiang to retreat, without causing any trouble. She had already guessed in her heart. The atmosphere of the Zhaohua Hall was particularly solemn, and Song Jin Yue couldn't sit still. She stood up to look at the blue screen and saw Xiang Xiu personally escorting Dr. Su towards the outside of the Zhaohua Hall. She had just crossed the blue screen and left the side hall. The palace maid serving in the Zhaohua Hall respectfully bowed and called out, Miss Song Eyre. Song Jin Yue nodded slightly before walking towards her aunt's resting room. After the screen embroidered with red lacquer Nanmu and auspicious dragons and phoenixes, it is my aunt's bed. At this moment, only Cui Xiang was guarding inside. Seeing her coming, Cui Xiang stood up and saluted, Miss Song Eyre. Cui Xiang, I'll accompany my aunt. Song Jin Yue's thoughts were all entangled by her aunt lying on the bed, and beneath the bright yellow embroidered brocade was a pale and powerless face. Cui Xiang was in a difficult situation, but the empress on the bed woke up at this moment. When she saw the young girl sitting by the bed, a faint smile appeared on her pale and powerless face. Clear fundus of the eyes. Yue. With just one sound, Song Jin Yue's heart trembled. The oppressive beast in her chest was about to burst the embankment in an instant. Tightly pursing her lips, a hoarse choking voice came from her throat, "Auntie." The queen on the couch stretched out her hands from the bright yellow soft quilt, wanting to hug her. Just then, for a moment, she seemed to see her deceased sister. When she was young, her parents were always outside the border, guarding her grandmother's side and showing filial piety. Only she and her legitimate sister were there, but the younger sister was timid and could cry in fear if there was a slight thunder. At that time, she always held her sister in her arms and covered her ear with her hand, trying to block all sounds that could scare her out of her ears. But later she entered the palace, and her sister married into the government. Within a few years, she passed away, leaving only a trace of her niece's bloodline in this world. The sister who always calls out to Jie with a soft and sweet voice is no longer here. In these years, she has dreamed of her sister again at midnight, but she has never dreamed of her again. At that moment, she really thought that the girl in front of her was her childhood sister. In just an instant, she woke up. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Prelude. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7 Prelude. Song Jin Yue suppressed the urge to throw herself into her aunt's arms and reached out to tightly grasp her slender palm. Just come back. The empress murmured, but with just one sentence, Song Jin Yue suppressed her tears for a long time, and in an instant, they disintegrated and disintegrated. The queen withdrew her hand from her hand and gently wiped away the tears on her face, with a soft and weak smile on her face. As if coaxing another girl through the face in front of her. Help your aunt up and sit down, the more you lie down, the less energetic you become. The queen's pale face gradually showed a hint of redness, and Song Jin Yue quickly took a bright yellow soft cushion and placed it by the bed before helping her aunt sit up. Turning around, he instructed Xiang Xiu, "Sister Xiang Xiu, could you please bring a thicker fox fur cloak for your aunt?" "Yes." The empress saw Miss Song Air, and her overall energy and spirit were much better than before. She bowed and bowed before leaving, and ordered the palace maid outside the palace to fetch some food for the empress. "I think Miss Song Air is here, and the empress may have an appetite to eat some food." Autumn Yun also went to guard outside the palace, and there were only the two of them in the empress's dormitory. The queen tightly held Song Jin Yue's hand, tears streaming down her eyes. "I've suffered," she said. Song Jin Yue took out a blue handkerchief embroidered with peach blossoms from her arms and gently wiped the sweat beads on the empress's forehead, shaking her head. The days at Yunquan Villa were actually not difficult. On the contrary, it is much more comfortable than living in the capital. "Auntie, when you feel better, Yue will accompany you to the imperial garden for a stroll." Taking the blue handkerchief back into her arms, Song Jin Yue comforted her aunt. But her body, she knows it herself. It's hard to say whether she can get through this disaster. In recent days, her appetite has been deteriorating, and the phlegm she just coughed up has even carried some blood. The palace maid, who is full of Zhaohua Palace, has been flustered. The queen smiled bitterly and couldn't bear to disappoint her. Xiang Xiu opened the bright yellow pearl curtain and came in with a silver-gray fox fur cloak in her hand. Behind her, Suixiang carried a red lacquered yellow pear wood tray with a bowl of chicken soup and vegetables congee. The fresh aroma of the chicken soup suddenly permeated. Song Jin Yue took the silver-gray fox fur cloak from Xiang Xiu, bent over to put it on for her aunt, and asked softly, "Aunt, how about some congee?" Her eyes were full of worry. The queen didn't have the heart to disappoint her. She was bitter and had no appetite, but she nodded her head and asked her to bring chicken soup and vegetables congee. In the bright yellow porcelain bowl carved with lifelike dragons flying and phoenixes dancing, the thick rice porridge is floating with a little green color. There is no greasy at all, and only the delicious chicken soup can be smelled from the taste. Song Jin Yue scoops out a spoonful of chicken soup congee and blows it. "This was just spoonful by spoonful fed into my aunt's mouth. She had never done these things in her past life. When she fell ill from a young age, it was her mother and aunt who took care of her like this. She was always the noble woman who was taken care of with utmost care by everyone. Now, she only wants to make up for the regrets left by her past life. After all, Yue has grown up. Empress Xing's eyes moved slightly, showing both pity and affection. Does Auntie think Yue is not as good looking as she was when she was young? Jin Yue frowned, pursed her lips, and had a mischievous expression on her face, which made the Empress laugh. But her body was weak at the end, but she only smiled a few times, and the Empress's face turned a bit pale again, panting heavily. Jin Yue quickly handed the bright yellow porcelain bowl to Xiangxiu. Xiangxiu took the porcelain bowl and then reached out to the Empress's chest, gently following her aunt's breath, her eyes filled with self-blame. The queen looked at her and felt a bit annoyed. Yue, my aunt has nothing to do with you. Please use some more congee. The queen had no taste in her mouth, and any delicacies from the mountains and seas were like a bland broth. As long as something can be eaten, it is beneficial or harmless in the end. Jin Yue hurriedly takes the chicken soup congee from Xiang embroidery and feeds her aunt spoonful by spoonful. Is it just my aunt's illness that the hospital really doesn't treat well? I couldn't help but ask my aunt, Auntie, why not change to a new imperial physician at the imperial hospital? The Empress shook her head and sighed. If your majesty were to know that our palace has been sick all along, and instead it would make the whole palace restless, then. The remaining. The queen didn't say anything more. However, Jin Yue understood that October 15th was the Empress Dowager's birthday. Every year in early September, the entire palace would start preparing for the Empress Dowager's birthday. Unlike previous years, this year marks the Empress Dowager's 60th birthday. Thinking about the past few days of my aunt's hard work and the Empress Dowager's birthday, my illness has been delayed day after day. In her past life, my aunt dragged her sickly body to prepare for the Empress Dowager's birthday. On the day of the palace banquet on the Empress Dowager's birthday, her aunt fainted in public. Therefore, the Empress Dowager invited herself out of the palace to Qingxiu in the Nanshan Imperial Villa. Auntie, if you don't recover from this illness soon, what should you do if you fall tired on the day of Empress Dowager's birthday? Jin Yue placed the bottomed porcelain bowl on a red-painted Nanmo low stool to the side, and with the handkerchief from the red gold forged basin brought by Xiang embroidery, carefully wiping the corners of the Empress's lips. The Empress also understood this truth, but the Su Tai who was treating her was the head of the Tai hospital. Su Tai couldn't even treat her illness well, so she couldn't believe anyone else. It's just that, not to mention this disappointing thing. When you entered the palace today, your aunt felt a little lighter than before. She spent most of her time lying on the bed every day, feeling groggy. Why don't you accompany her to walk outside the Zhaohua Hall? Xiangxiu was about to come forward to persuade, but was stopped by Jin Yue. Her aunt had only used chicken soup before, and it was also excellent to go out and breathe. Being confined in the hall all day, even if not sick, one is likely to be confined to illness. Sister Xiangxiu, don't worry, I will take good care of my aunt. She personally helped her aunt get off the bed, tied the silver-gray fox fur cloak tightly around her fair neck, and squatted down to take out the boots embroidered with auspicious clouds on the bright yellow brocade for her to wear. After dressing neatly, she carefully looked again and saw that everything was in order before personally helping her aunt out of the Zhaohua Hall. Inside the courtyard, which was paved with white jade and blue stones, there were black-painted large jars arranged in the four corners of the corridor. The lotus flowers inside only left a few remnants of leaves, except for the fruitful and plump lotus pod standing upright in the jars, looking at the charm of Jiangnan Lake light boats. Gong Yi brought out a soft chair wrapped in bright yellow embroidered peony brocade. Xiangxiu held two soft cushions embroidered with bright yellow peonies in her hands. When Gong Yi put down the soft chair, she carefully arranged the cushions. Jin Yue helped her aunt sit over, but the empress smiled and pulled her down together. When she sat down, the empress didn't let go and looked at her with a smile. "There's something that my aunt hasn't told you, and I wonder if someone in the mansion mentioned it to you when you returned yesterday," she said. Jin Yue naturally guessed that in her previous life, when she returned to her mansion, the officials did not mention to her that the empress had appointed her as the empress dowager for the fifth prince. It was at the empress dowager's birthday banquet that she brought up this matter. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Nuns. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8 Nuns. I only returned to the mansion yesterday evening and greeted my father, so I went back to rest, so I don't know. She needed her aunt's words to explain this, and then she followed her aunt's words to mention the matter of getting married. I think my aunt can also be prepared. The gentle breeze blew up a strand of hair from Jin Yue's temples. The empress raised her hand and smiled as she smoothed it out before slowly saying, "Auntie married old Wu for you. This happened a month after you went to Yunquan Villa." Jin Yue frowned slightly and was immediately surprised. She held her aunt's hand tightly and her face was full of disbelief. "Aunt Yue, aunt has also come from your age, so there's no need to be shy. Your thoughts are clear to aunt." In her eyes, the empress tightened her hand, pinched it, and sighed in her heart, "Young is so good." At that age, she was actually full of longing for the future, until a decree was issued that she became the crown princess. Originally, her family had no intention of sending her daughter to the palace, but in the end, she could not escape the will of the heavenly family. The imperial grace is magnificent, and the Zhang family must not violate it. Fortunately, after getting married, she also played harmoniously with His Majesty, which slightly compensated for some regrets. Jin Yue suppressed the overwhelming hatred in her heart and looked at her aunt, saying politely, "Auntie, you misunderstood. I only have sibling feelings for the fifth prince, and no male. The child of Lao Wu was raised under the knee of our palace. Yue, look around the capital, how many families want to send their daughters to Lao Wu's mansion? But over the years, he has waited for you, and now there are no concubines in the mansion." Before Jin Yue could finish speaking, the empress interrupted her, looking at her with a melancholy expression and acting as a lobbyist for He Yuanjia. She has been watching two children grow up together since childhood, and if there is no emotional connection between them, she would never believe it. Jin Yue's argument, in her opinion, was just a girl with a thin face. Jin Yue lowered her eyes and stared at her moon-white boots embroidered with bamboo leaves in a daze. In her past life, she had also been a good He Yuanjia. But in the end, at the moment when he betrayed and killed his close relative, he said, "The heavenly family has never said anything about family affection. Such a patient temperament, such a heartless appearance. She always breaks out in a cold sweat when she dreams back at midnight, and her heart is filled with towering hatred." The queen patted her back lightly and murmured, "But you have other thoughts." She thought Jin Yue had met someone else at Yunquan Villa, that's why. Jin Yue shook her head repeatedly, and when she looked at her aunt, tears welled up in her eyes and her voice became a bit hoarse. "Aunt Yue don't like the fifth prince," she said. "Yes, she doesn't like it." Xiang Xiu stood by to serve, but unexpectedly, Miss Song Air burst into tears. She quickly handed a lotus-root pink brocade and satin handkerchief over to the empress, who personally took it and wiped away the tears for Miss Song Air. She sighed and said, "Well done, why did you cry? If you don't want to get married, don't get married." Xiang Xiu quickly retreated to the corridor and asked the palace maid who was serving in the courtyard to leave together. The empress felt a little heartbroken. This child has rarely shed tears since childhood. Now Wei Chu Baba seems to have suffered a great deal of injustice, looking like a very lonely and helpless little cat, crying as if her internal organs and lungs were being pulled by someone. Jin Yue didn't want to cry. But when I think of He Yuanjia, the grievance I feel is like a raging beast breaking a dam. It's not about feeling sad about He Yuanjia's actions, but about feeling helpless, angry, and desperate when his loved one tragically died in front of me in the previous life. She snuggled up to her aunt's arms, wrapped her hands around her slender waist, choked her throat, and said wrongly, "Aunt, Yue doesn't want to marry into the royal family. No matter how prestigious the Tian family is, there are many rules. Yue only wants to marry into an ordinary family and live a simple life." The queen listened carefully as she spoke one by one, lightly patting her back until she heard her say that the heavenly family is noble and has many rules. "I can't help but think of my youth. Yes, if I could choose, who would be willing to marry into the royal family? What about nobility?" She sat with the queen, but how many pairs of eyes were secretly staring at her? Only she herself is aware of the bitterness involved. Thinking about this, she couldn't help but be stunned. Yue has been raised in a deep boudoir since childhood. How can she understand such a clear truth? But something she didn't know happened at Yunquan Villa. She gently pushed away her niece in her arms, pinching her arms with both hands and a tense expression. "Yue, don't hide it from your aunt. You have always had a simple mind, how can you figure this out now?" Jin Yue was taken aback by her aunt's question. Indeed, she couldn't hide anything from her aunt's eyes. She lowered her eyelids and twisted a blue brocade handkerchief in her hands. "Aunt, Yue has lived in Yunquan Villa for 5 years and has become accustomed to such a free and easy life. That's why." The empress finally relaxed a little, "That's why, but the child of Yuan frame. 5 years ago, it was the empress who ordered the marriage of the two families. Now, if I withdraw from the marriage, I think of the child who has been raised by my side since childhood. He is such a sensible and filial child. She doesn't want to disappoint that poor child." Jin Yue's expression was solemn, and she was bound to withdraw from this marriage. "Aunt, Yue really doesn't like the fifth prince. If you force Yue to marry the fifth prince, then Yue would rather marry and become a nun." She knew that at this moment, she had no way out. If she didn't express her attitude today and kept evasive, then her aunt would only consider her face thin. The marriage between the two families remains the same. But just then, the dark blue clothes embroidered with auspicious cloud patterns on silver coins at the entrance of the Zhaohua Hall paused. It was none other than the fifth prince He Yuanjia who came. She said she would rather be a nun than marry him. How could she call him Yuan frame brother, always giving him all the newly acquired treasures, thinking about his food and clothing, liking the girl following behind him, now saying they don't want to marry him? He Yuanjia only felt a tightness in his chest, as if he had been punched, indescribably uncomfortable. The Empress Fengwei caught a glimpse of the dark blue clothes at the entrance of the palace. Feeling relieved, she quickly exclaimed, "Old Wu is here, come in quickly." Jin Yue then lowered her head and straightened her clothes, stood up and saluted, "I've seen your highness before." He Yuanjian remained calm on his face and greeted Jin Yue with a "mother" before walking up to her. "Sister Jin Yue has returned, and I have prepared a gift for your birthday in recent years. I will have someone send it to the national palace later. You girl, look how much old Wu misses you," the empress joked with a smile, covering up her embarrassment just now. But when Jin Yue looked at He Yuanjia again, she only felt that it had made her lose her appetite. "What annual birthday gift is prepared? I just casually moved a few gifts from the warehouse. Why did I believe his lies in my past life?" Because she loves He Yuanjian too much, she believes whatever he says, losing her ability to judge herself. "It must be like this. Thank you, Your Highness. I have to say that even though I hate it a lot, I have to hide it for now." The atmosphere inside the hall only eased a little. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Confession. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9 Confession. He Yuanjia nodded and then looked at the Empress with a serious expression, his eyes filled with worry. "I see that the Queen Mother's recent appearance is not as good as before. Have you invited an imperial physician to take a look?" The imperial physician has come to see it and it's not a big deal. There have been more trivial matters lately, so I'm getting tired, the empress explained with a smile. For the child who was raised under her lap just after the full moon, the empress treated him as if he were her own, and even the crown prince treated this brother more intimately than the other brothers. Thinking of the soft and sticky, small lump, holding in my arms, all these years have passed in a blink of an eye. Old Wu, hurry back to your palace and change your clothes before accompanying your mother for lunch. Looking at Lao Wu in his court uniform, it seems that he had just left the court when he heard that Yue had entered the palace. It was only then that Ba Ba found him, indicating that he highly valued Yue in his heart. He Yuanjia nodded and glanced at Song Jin Yue again, saying, Sister Jin Yue, please talk to Empress Mother first. After speaking, he bowed with both hands before retreating. However, as soon as he turned around, the smile on his face had long disappeared. My eyes were filled with a chill. Song Jin Yue watched as he Yuanjia left, feeling an indescribable emotion in her heart for a moment. Suddenly, I remembered my older sister. Dr. Su has come and gone, and he Yuanjia has also come and gone, big sister. I think it's coming soon. He Yuanjia had just left the Zhaohua hall with his front foot, but Song Jinsi stepped into the hall with his back foot. He only held a red lacquer yellow pearwood tray in his hand, inside was a roux-kiln porcelain cup, and on top was a cluster of enamel-colored flowers. Song Jinsi took a light step on the lotus, wearing a light purple skirt and walking under the sun, which was particularly elegant and refined. Meeting only is like a peach blossom, shy and dripping. I think we just had a close relationship with He Yuanjia, otherwise how could Song Jinsi's face be described as peach blossom and shy? The empress was unaware that the young lady of the Song family had also entered the palace. I frowned for a moment and looked at Song Jin Yue. Auntie, the eldest sister has never been to the palace before, so Yue thought to herself, take the eldest sister into the palace today to have a look. When she was young, during festivals, Shen would bring Song Jinsi to her door. At that time, she didn't know the key to it. Since childhood, she has been the only child in the vast government office. She often stays in the palace and refuses to go back, feeling that her home is deserted. Until Song Jinsi arrived. She threw herself into her mother's arms, entwined with her mother, and made a fuss to keep Song Jinsi in the mansion. Later, as she grew older, she understood the meaning of the outer room. I also understand that Song Jinsi has a blood relationship with her. She also understood that when she was young, she was clamoring, shouting, and making a fuss to leave behind the obscure and unclear emotions in Song Jinsi's mother's eyes. She was filled with immense regret, thinking that at that time, her mother's heart was like being stabbed with a sharp blade. She dared not look into her mother's eyes, nor did she dare to mention her childhood, until her mother passed away and the regret hidden in her heart. I never said it out loud. At this point, she rarely laughed again. Song Jinsi had already brought a red lacquered yellow pearwood tray closer and bowed respectfully, saying, my daughter Song Jinsi has seen my aunt. Get up, and in the future, just call the Empress Dowager to this palace. Before Song Jinsi could finish speaking, she was coldly interrupted by the Empress. Despite being young, with a stiff smile on her face and slightly red eyes, she respectfully replied, I have taken note. The Empress dislikes the stepwife of the Duke of Song, and this matter is well known to everyone in the capital. Therefore, Shen never received invitations to banquets in the palace. Items that can be bestowed upon ladies of noble families, but the Empress has never lacked the Shen family. The Empress has always believed that if it weren't for Shen, her younger sister wouldn't have died. So, the Empress was also reluctant to see the daughter of Shen. But for the sake of face, he waved his hand and asked Song Jinsi to stand up. Nyang Nyang, just now, a talented minister followed her sister into the Zhaohua hall. Seeing that she was weak, she went to the imperial dining room to prepare a light yam congee for her. Please give her a sin. Song Jinsi knelt on the ground holding a red lacquer and yellow pearwood tray, her eyes clear and focused like a Buddha's heart. But Song Jin Yue understood. Her good sister, on the one hand, wants to appear dignified and considerate in front of her aunt, and on the other hand, she wants to let her know where she has just gone. But her good sister is really foolish. Such a wise mind, how could it forget one thing? Is this imperial dining room in the palace a place that just a young lady from the government can set foot in? Moreover, who led the way for her in this vast palace? These things, as long as you have the heart to think about them, you can detect any anomalies. However, Song Jinsi was too impatient and rushed to curry favor with the empress, but 100 secrets and one slip eventually revealed. That's quite considerate. Our palace grants you no guilt, get up. The empress's tone was faint, and she didn't want to argue with the same little girl about the grudges between adults. This actually shows that the mother of her country is lacking in manners. Song Jinsi was flattered and said yes. Then she got up slowly and was about to take the clear kanji to the front. The empress waved her hand and spoke lightly, I've only used food before, but I don't have an appetite right now. Let's cut it off for now. Xiang Xiu hurriedly walked up to Miss Song, took the tray from her hand, and then handed it over to Cui Xiang who followed behind. The empress said, Xiang embroidery, send someone to take Miss Song around the palace. This is the gentle meaning of parting. Song Jinsi lowered her eyes, suppressed the hint of anger in her heart, and then stood up to say goodbye. Although the sun was just empty, it had already entered Mengdong. There was a gentle breeze blowing in the courtyard of the Zhaohua Palace, and the people who were blowing at the end gradually felt a chill. Song Jin Yue leaned over and tightened her tight silver-gray fox fur cloak for her aunt. When she touched her aunt's palm, she felt a chill. Song Jin Yue immediately looked nervous and looked up at her aunt, whispering, It's really cold outside. Aunt, let's go back to the hall and sit down. It's all so good. The queen wanted to sit down again, but couldn't help but shiver before giving up. Song Jin Yue helped his aunt into the Zhaohua hall. The palace maid serving inside immediately retreated. The empress sat down with Song Jin Yue and then continued her previous conversation, Old Wu, are you really not considering it anymore? In the empress's heart, she couldn't bear to disappoint that child. It can be seen that Song Jin Yue's expression was resolute. She had never seen her niece with such a resolute expression before, and for a moment she felt a bit dazed. It's as if the niece in front of me has changed. Aunt Yue really doesn't want to. Yes, she doesn't want to. The childhood sweetheart whom she admired wholeheartedly in her youth died tragically at the hands of their dog man and woman. Those once ignorant, those joys. As early as the vast starry sky disappeared completely, there was no trace left. As if she had never been happy for that person before. The empress felt a bit uneasy. A child like Lao Wu had heard Yuer's thoughts today. If she were to retract the decree of marriage again as soon as she thought about Lao Wu's situation, the empress's heart was pulled together. Lao Wu Tongir, even the crown prince, has always treated her equally in her heart, with her hands and backs being her flesh. Thank you very much for Xian En's reward. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Discoveries. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10 Discoveries. The queen is not willing to let go easily. When she choked up and cried just now, the empress agreed at that moment, but when old Wu walked in, the uncontrollable desolation in his eyes shook her. She doesn't want to hurt either of them. Yue, there is a prerequisite for Auntie's promise not to marry Lao Wu. Only when you have the person you like, will Auntie retract the decree of marriage, she said. Song Jin knew with joy that this was already her aunt's biggest concession. Let her sit together with He Yuanjian for dinner, as she is afraid she cannot suppress her determination to kill him. After repeated rejections, she finally withdrew from the Zhaohua hall. She promised her aunt to stay in the palace with her for a few days. In 2 days. Stepping on the ground of white jade and blue stone slabs, then looking at the palace with red walls and green tiles, and looking at the cramped square sky, one feels suffocated and suffocated. Xiang Xiu personally escorted her out of the Zhaohua hall. Song Jin Yue then asked about Song Jinxi's whereabouts. Xiang Xiu's sister, where did my eldest sister go? Miss Song is alone in the Imperial Garden. Just now, Cui Xiang led Miss Song out of the Zhaohua hall, but in no time, Cui Xiang returned, saying that Miss Song insisted on wandering alone in the Imperial Garden, and she had just returned. Upon hearing this, Song Jin delights in the next meal, alone. She turned around and looked at Xiang Xiu, with a slight forehead, and slowly said, Sister Xiang Xiu, my aunt is inseparable from me. You should go back quickly. I know all the roads in the palace. This. Xiang Embroidery looked puzzled. But Song Jin Yue still insisted on doing so. She just gave up and gave her all kinds of advice, saying, Miss Song, be careful in all things. This closed palace is not afraid of ghosts and gods, only people have ulterior motives. Miss Song what you want? Xiang Xiu glanced around before taking out a moon-white brocade and plain handkerchief from her arms. She tightly held it in her hand and personally delivered it to Miss Song feeling a bit embarrassed. Sister Xiang Xiu, don't worry, I won't let anyone else know about this. Seeing her promise, Xiang Xiu finally calmed down a bit. Song Jin Yue smiled and thanked before leading the two maids, Qiuyun and Yunxiang, who were waiting 3 zhang away, towards the Imperial Garden. There was already suspicion in her heart about her aunt's illness. When there was no one around just now, she secretly instructed Xiang Xiu to bring her aunt's prescription. It was not that she couldn't trust Dr. Su, but that Dr. Su's death in a previous life was too suspicious, which made people have to suspect. Crossing the long palace path and passing through the circular arches one after another, eunuchs and palace maids pass by along the way. The long blue stone-paved palace path and the red-painted palace walls all make people feel that there is no smoke or fire, only vast desolation. Although it has entered Mengdong, the imperial garden in the palace is still colorful, with 100 flowers blooming and competing to be the first. Song Jin Yue looked at the palace, and besides the smoke and fire of the imperial dining room, it was also the earthly atmosphere of the imperial garden. Along the long corridor of the water pavilion, I searched for the overlapping rockeries, and then reached the winding path of the bamboo forest where 100 flowers bloomed. There was no trace of Song Jin Yue at all. Song Jin Yue frowned and pondered in her heart where Song Jinxi had gone. She didn't believe Song Jinxi had the courage to go to the 5th prince's palace in broad daylight. Yun Xiang followed closely behind Miss Air along the way. It's both terrifying and like walking on thin ice. She was afraid that Miss Air would find her own young lady, because she was afraid of seeing things she shouldn't see, and also afraid that Miss Air wouldn't be able to find her own young lady. Because of this huge palace, if Miss Air were lost, how could she survive? Yun Xiang followed Miss Air with fear, afraid to say more. But when Song Jin Yue's cold voice sounded, it still made her tremble and she unconsciously took a step back. Yun Xiang, where do you think big sister will go? Yun Xiang's face turned pale, and the person wearing a light pink skirt became more and more anxious. She shook her head repeatedly, and the tassel hairpin on her bun made a crackling sound. I don't know, she said. Song Jin Yue's face lit up with a light smile, and she took a step closer with a deep voice. What do you look like you've done something wrong? Maid. I'm worried about my young lady. Song Jin Yue sneered coldly, turned around and walked towards the direction of the palace entrance. Yun Xiang stood in place in a daze, only seeing a hint of lake blue skirt hem. When she regained her senses, she quickly chased after her. Where did Song Jinxi go? Where will they meet privately? Thinking about something in her heart, Song Jin Yue was completely unaware. When she stopped, she looked up and saw the black painted Nanmo plaque, which was carved with 3 characters in yellow paint. Shangyun Hall. Her thoughts couldn't help but be pulled to a young age, and she often went to the palace to stay. This Shangyun Hall became her residence. Whenever her mother comes to pick her up and return to the palace, she always makes a fuss and refuses to go back. There are many playmates in the palace, and she gets angry with her mother, saying she doesn't want to be a child of the palace and disdains the coldness of the palace. Later on, as she grew older, she would not stay overnight in the palace. And Yue is also older. He has been living with the crown prince all along, which is not very convenient. And only then gave the Shangyun Hall to Yue. Miss Song Air. A palace maid dressed in light purple palace attire was holding a black lacquer nan tray, covered with red cloth. The palace maid was about to walk out when she met her head. Immediately, he smiled and saluted. She remembers this palace maid, her name is Dongrue, who was given to her by her aunt when she was young. Later, she followed the Shangyun Palace to reward Huanjian. Sister Dongrue, can the fifth prince be here? Dongrue is a cautious palace maid who took good care of her when she was young. If it weren't for the charm of autumn, she would have had to work with her aunt to bring people to the government office. Dongrue shook her head and replied, "The Empress has summoned my family to the Zhaohua Hall for lunch." "When did you go?" "When I left the Zhaohua Hall just now, I never saw him change into a court uniform before going." Dongrue tilted her head and rolled her eyes. "Your Highness came back and changed into a court uniform before going." Miss Song Air didn't see my Highness. She said the Shangyun Hall and the Zhaohua Hall are only separated by 2 palace paths, closer than the Crown Prince's sleeping hall, indicating the Empress's love for this adopted son. Song Jin thanked him and said goodbye. Dongrue originally insisted on delivering it, because there was a black lacquer nan tray in her hand, but Her Royal Highness ordered her to deliver it to Miss Song Air at the Duke's mansion. Miss Song Air insisted on not letting her deliver it, and asked her maid Chiuyan to take the black painted nan tray. She could only stop and watch the few people leave. Yun Xiang followed behind, daring not to breathe. She vaguely guessed something about the relationship between her own young lady and His Highness the Fifth Prince. But if Miss Air were to know about this, it would be a deadly matter. I was trembling and anxious all the way, feeling anxious in my heart. Silently praying in my heart, "Miss, please don't be with the Fifth Prince." Meta frame. As they arrived at a deserted cold palace, a shy and coquettish voice called for a pause in their footsteps. The dilapidated red-painted wooden door was covered in rust, and large chunks of paint had already peeled off from the black-painted pillars, looking particularly dilapidated. Yun Xiang was shocked. That was the voice of her own young lady. I was busy pushing open the gate of the cold palace, but was stopped by a cold glare from Song Jin Yue. "Wait here for Big Sister, tell Big Sister, I won't wait for her, I'll go back to the mansion first." Song Jin Yue's face was cold, suppressing her anger and the urge to push the door in. How could she easily let go of this dog man and woman? She wants to torture them bit by bit. Let them suspect each other and hurt each other. Finally, watching them transform from lovers to enemies. She wants Song Jinsi to know what it means to be married. They were originally birds in the same forest, but in great difficulty, they led their own way. So she wants this dog man and woman to know that she already knows about their affair. Next, let them live in fear every day. After leaving the palace, Chiuyan hesitated to speak, but her hesitant expression made Song Jin Yue find it quite amusing. Big Sister and the Fifth Prince are in the cold palace. What do you think they are doing? End of this chapter.